There is a drawer in the bishop's house that I have opened with my own hands more times than I can count. Low to the floor on the left side of a plain pine desk, no lock on it because a lock would suggest there was something inside worth hiding, and we did not admit that there was. Inside that drawer is a ledger, black cover, worn soft at the corners from decades of thumbs, and in that ledger, in a column no outsider has ever seen, is a record of the first night of every marriage in our district going back longer than I have been alive. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because the women who have told you their stories, the ones who lay in the dark and did not know what was happening to their own bodies, they never knew this drawer existed. They never knew that the morning after, while they were milking cows and washing dishes and wondering why no one would speak to them about the night before, a man was walking down a lane toward that pine desk to make a report. I was that man. And what I carried down that lane, what I presented and what I wrote and what I have never spoken of since is the thing I am going to set down today. I have started to tell this 100 times and stopped 100 times. There is a particular kind of quiet that a man learns in my old position, and it does not leave you when you leave. It sits in the chest like a stone in a coat pocket you have forgotten you are wearing. For years I told myself the quiet was reverence. Now I know it was only the habit of a man who was never once in his whole life permitted to say the true thing out loud. So I am going to say it now, plainly, while I still have the nerve. Before I go any further, let me tell you who I am. I grew up old order Amish, and for 31 years I was one of the men who held the rules and was told to enforce them. I'm not going to give you my name. Where I am now, a name is a door I am not ready to open. But everything I am about to tell you, I lived from the inside, from the side of the desk, that gives the orders instead of the side that receives them. If you want to understand this world as it actually runs, not the postcard, not the tourist buggy ride, but the machinery underneath, then stay with me and subscribe, and in the comments tell me one thing. Before today, did you ever imagine there was a record being kept at all? Now? Let me explain what the outside world has never been told. Most of what you've heard about this world comes from the women who left, and every word of it is true. But there's another side, the men who were handed the rules and told to enforce them. I was one of those men for 31 years. And the things I held the deepest, the things a man in my position was never permitted to say out loud, I couldn't fit into a video. So I wrote them down. A book called The Weight a Man is Given. The link is in the first comment and the description, and I'll tell you more before the end. For now, stay with me. Here's the first thing you have to understand, and it is the thing that took me the longest to say, even to myself. What a man presents to the elders after the first night is not a physical object. There's no proof laid on a table, no stained cloth like the old European stories, nothing you could photograph. What is presented is a word, a single spoken confirmation, given quietly, man to man in the front room of the bishop's house, that the marriage has been, in the old phrasing, vollzogen, completed, made whole, sealed. The union is not considered finished at the vows. In the Ordnung as I was raised in it, the marriage is not fully a marriage in the eyes of the church until that confirmation is given. And so the morning after his wedding, before the work of the day is fully underway, the new husband walks to the bishop, or in some districts to 2 ordained men, and he says the words that say it is done. That is what I presented the morning after my own wedding, when I was a young man and understood none of what I was participating in. I remember the walk more than I remember the words. Frost on the fence rails, my breath ahead of me in the cold, my new wife back in the house we had been given, and I did not know then, and would not know for years, that she was as frightened and as unschooled in all of it as I was. I walked down that lane, a boy who had been told he was now a man, and I made my report, and I believed the making of it was what turned the one into the other. And that is what I later sat and received for 31 years from every young man in my district on the worst mornings of my calling. Let me take you into that room, because the room is the whole of it. It is early. The light is thin and gray and coming in low through a window with no curtain, because curtains gather dust and vanity in equal measure. There is a wood stove ticking as it warms, there is a pine desk and 2 chairs, and there is the drawer. The young man comes in with his hat in his hands. He does not sit until he is told to sit. He is exhausted in the particular way of a man who has been awake since 4 the previous morning, who has stood through 4 hours of preaching and fed 300 people, and then laid down beside a stranger he is now bound to for the rest of his earthly life. His eyes will not meet mine, and I know because I was him once that he does not fully understand why he is here or what he is about to say. I ask him, in the old language, whether the marriage is complete, and he says yes. That is nearly all of it. A yes given to a man twice his age about the most private hours of his life, in a cold room that smells of wood smoke and pipe tobacco. And then I open the drawer, and I take out the black ledger, and I make the mark. His name, her name, the date. and in the last column, a single word that means it is finished. I made that mark hundreds of times. My hand knew the motion, the nib scratching in the cold, the little sound of it, the sound of a life being filed. And not once in all those years did I ask the question that I now cannot stop asking, which is, what was that yes worth when the boy giving it had no more understanding of what he had done than a calf has of the fence it was born inside, because here's what no one in that room ever said. The yes was assumed, it was never truly a question. A young man did not walk into that room to be asked whether his marriage was whole. He walked in to confirm that it was, because in the entire architecture of our world, there was no version of events in which the answer was no. A marriage that was not completed was a scandal, a shame on two families, a crack in the foundation of the whole community. So the boy said yes, because yes was the only word the room was built to receive. And if the truth was more complicated, if the night had been frightening or clumsy, or if two children had lain in the dark and simply not known what they were meant to do, that truth had nowhere to go. It could not be spoken. It was pressed flat under a single word and filed in a drawer. I want to tell you about one morning in particular because it is the one I have never been able to leave behind. A young man came to me, one of the youngest I ever received, barely more than a boy, and he sat with his hat in his hands, and when I asked him the question, he did not answer right away. That silence was so far outside the pattern that I did not know what to do with it. Every other young man had said the word immediately, the way you say grace without thinking. This one looked at the floor. His hands turned the brim of his hat around and around. And then he looked up at me and he asked me a question of his own. He asked me if he had done something wrong. I've carried that question for a long time now, because the honest answer, the answer I did not have the courage or the vocabulary to give him, was that neither of us knew. He had been handed a wife and a house and a lifelong vow and had been told nothing. Nothing about her body, nothing about his own, nothing about the enormous frightening tenderness that was supposed to somehow appear between two people who had never been permitted to be alone together without a quilt and an open door between them. And now he was sitting in front of me, afraid that his fear itself was a sin, and I, the man he had come to for an answer, had been given no more of a map than he had. Two blind men in a cold room, one of them holding a pen. I told him it was fine. I told him to go home. I made the mark in the ledger, his yes filed like all the others, and I sent him back down the lane to a marriage neither of us had any idea how to help him carry. And I told myself I had done my duty. That is what the room teaches you to tell yourself. You did your duty. The mark is made, the drawer is closed, there's a part of this I can't get to here in the few minutes a video gives me. So I wrote it down instead, slowly, without the softening every algorithm asks for. It's the weight a man is given. 10 chapters, each one built around a single thing a man like me carries. An anvil, a black ledger, a lantern at the end of a lane, and what each one really cost the people I love. It's the confession of a man who held the authority and mistook the control for love. The link is in the first comment and the description. That's where the part I couldn't say out loud lives. Now let me tell you where this practice comes from, because I think it matters that you understand it was not invented out of cruelty. Almost nothing in that world is. The confirmation goes back centuries to the earliest Anabaptist communities in Europe, to a time when a marriage was not only a joining of two people, but a joining of two families, two farms, two lines of inheritance. A marriage that was entered into but not completed could be dissolved, and a dissolved marriage meant tangled land and shamed families and children whose belonging could be questioned. So the community needed to know plainly and without ambiguity that the thing was done and could not be undone. The confirmation was a way of closing a door so that no one could ever pry it back open. It was in its origin a kind of protection. You have to understand how a small, hunted people thinks. The Anabaptists were drowned and burned and driven across a continent for what they believed. When you have been that, you learn to close every gap through which harm might enter. You write things down. You require confirmations. You build walls of small certainties around the things that matter most, because uncertainty is the crack through which the world had always come in to hurt you. The ledger was a wall, and a wall built by frightened, faithful people to keep their children safe is a hard thing to hate, even when you have watched what it became. And this is the thing I most need you to understand about the whole of the life I lived, because it is the thing that took me out of it in the end. The cruelty was never in the intention. The cruelty was in the silence that grew up around the intention like bark around a wire. Every rule began as a protection, and then the protection hardened, and the reason for it was forgotten, and all that remained was the rule and the requirement that no one ask why. By the time that ledger reached my hands, no one alive could have told you what the confirmation was originally meant to guard against. We only knew that it was required and that a man in my chair made the mark and that the drawer stayed closed. I made those marks believing I was holding the community together. I told myself the drawer was a foundation stone. I called the control I exercised over those young men by another name. I called it care. I called it shepherding. I believed for most of 31 years that a man who held the rules and enforced them faithfully was a man who loved his people. It took me a very long time and a great deal of distance to understand that love and control can wear the same coat, and that from the inside, wearing it, you cannot always tell which one you have put on. There is a thing that happens to a man who is given authority young and never taught to doubt it. The authority stops feeling like a thing you hold and starts feeling like a thing you are. I did not make the marks in that ledger because I was a hard man. I made them because I could no longer see the difference between the rule and myself. When a young husband sat across from me and I asked him the question and wrote down his yes, I was not thinking of him as a frightened boy. I was thinking of the order. The order was the thing I loved, and I had confused it so completely with the people it was supposed to serve that I could stand in a cold room and file a boy's fear like a receipt and feel nothing but the quiet satisfaction of a duty done well. That is what frightens me most, looking back. Not that I was cruel, that I felt so calm. I think of the wives now more than anything, because in all those mornings, in all those hundreds of marks, there was one signature in the ledger that was always missing. Hers. The confirmation was given by the husband and received by a man. The woman whose most private night was being reported, filed, and sealed. She was never in the room. She was never asked. In many cases, she did not know the room existed. Her wedding night was recorded in a book she would never see, confirmed by two men she had not chosen, in a language of duty she had been taught only to obey. She lay in the dark, not knowing what was happening to her, and then in the morning her not knowing was signed off by other people and put away in a drawer. I think, too, of my own wife, who is gone now, and who I was married to for the length of a life, and never once asked how that first night had been for her. It did not occur to me that it was a question a man was allowed to ask. I made my mark in the ledger the morning after, and I never made the smaller, harder mark that would have been turning to the woman beside me and simply saying, "Are you all right?" 31 years I asked that question of frightened boys as a formality and never once asked it of her as a truth. That is a drawer of my own, and it does not have a lock either. When I finally understood all of that, really understood it, not as a rule, but as a thing done to real women, one of whom I had married, I could not make the mark any more. That was the beginning of the end for me. Not a dramatic thing, no shouting, no great rebellion. Just a morning when a young man sat down in front of me with his hat in his hands, and I looked at the drawer and I could not open it. My hand simply would not move to the handle. He waited, I told him at last, to go home to his wife and to be gentle with her and to talk to her, and those were not words the room had ever been built to say. I do not think he understood them. But I said them, and something in me that had been shut for 31 years came open, and it has not closed since. I want to be fair to the world I came from because it would be easy to stand here now and paint it only in black. That world gave me things I will carry to the end of my life. It gave me a community that showed up. For every barn raising, every funeral, every family burned out or flooded out or laid low by illness, it gave me a discipline and a capacity for work that has held me upright through years that would have broken a softer man. It gave me a faith that I have wrestled with and rebuilt, but never entirely lost. The people in it were not villains. My own hands were not clean, but they were not cruel. We were all of us inside a machine none of us had built, turning the crank we had been handed, believing the turning was love. But there is no scripture that requires a woman's most private night to be recorded in a book she will never read. There is no commandment that a boy's fear must be pressed flat under a single word and filed away. There is no God I still believe in who designed two frightened children, put them in a dark room with no map, and then asked one of them to walk down a lane the next morning and swear that everything was whole. That is the thing I presented to the elders after my first night, and later received from hundreds of others. A yes with no room to be anything else, a word that closed a door, a mark in a ledger in a drawer with no lock because we would not admit there was anything inside worth hiding. If you grew up in a place where obedience was called love and silence was called peace, and the question you most needed to ask was the one thing you were never allowed to say, then you already understand this room better than I did while I was standing in it. I see you. The thing you were not permitted to say out loud was never a sin. The sin was the silence that would not let you say it. If you want the rest, the full account from a man still standing inside the thing he's describing, not at the end of it, it's all in the weight a man is given. Links in the first comment and the description. 240 pages of what I was never allowed to set down anywhere else. Open the drawer with me. Until next time. Light the fire, but don't forget to speak.